Very good Saturday to everybody. Thanks for clicking on to the European Outlook today. It is the 14th of December. It is a slightly later video tonight, but it is hopefully going to be of interest to you. Going to look at, again, going to revisit the Magellan Oscillation, something that I continue to harp on about, but the reasons why I do so is because it has been a great indicator in terms of the overall pattern. Very nice relationship between the various phases and the type of pattern that we've experienced really from the back half of summer, extending from August all the way through till now, when the MJO has been in the various phases, and we'll look at what those phases are and what they correlate to in just a second. Certainly the pattern has really kind of showed what you would expect with the various modes. So this is, first and foremost, phases 1 through 8 of the MJO. Generally speaking, they start off with the West Indian Ocean in phase 1. You can also see a phase 1 over the Central Pacific, just to the east of the dateline as well. Then you've got phases 2 and 3. And phases 2 into 3 tends to promote relatively stormy conditions across western areas of Europe. We tend to have a stronger jet stream across the Atlantic, and areas of low pressure thrown into the western side of the European continent. What happens is, the past, several episodes of this MJO, so MJO obviously being an enhanced area of convection, you've got an active phase and an inactive phase of the MJO. When it's in these phases and it's active, you've got enhanced thunderstorm activity over a given area. So phases 2 and 3, central area of the Indian Ocean, tends to promote quite a lot of unsettled conditions and generally milder, positive Arctic oscillation, and more so positive North Atlantic oscillation. Once it goes into phases 4 and 5, that is a very mild phase indeed. Tends to promote higher pressure over mainland Europe. Again, low pressure to the north, high pressure to the south, and usually you've got an active westerly flow across the Atlantic moving into northwestern areas of Europe. Once the MJO moves into phases 6, which is into the western side of the Pacific, so it moves east of Indonesia, you tend to find that we start to see blockier setup across, whether it be northwestern Europe or over the UK and Ireland itself. A phase 6 has, in recent months, promoted a lot of blockiness across central and northern Europe, low pressure to the south, and during particularly the back half of summer into early autumn, we had a lot of warm waters within the Mediterranean basin, a lot of residual heat that had built up during the summer months. What had happened is, once we entered that phase 6, pressure built to the north. We had cold intrusions and a split jet, one arm going north, one arm going south into southern areas of Europe. And with cold air in the mid and upper levels of a residual warmth left behind during the course of the summer in the lower levels of the atmosphere, and added fuel being the 26, 27, 28 Celsius waters of the Mediterranean basin, was seen major flooding as a consequence. Then once the MJO moved, so that pulse of convection that moves from west to east, usually over a 40 to 60 day period, that eastward progress kind of starts a little bit, it fades in some phases, and then it re-establishes, it reignites in another phase. But once the MJO rotated away from 6 into particularly 7, 8, and 1, that then fed northwards, created a more blocky pattern over the northern hemisphere as a whole, created that ripple effect, and therefore we started to see heat getting transferred north towards the equator, north towards the Arctic, and cold south towards the equator. I will get there in the end. But that phase 7, 8, and 1 of the Magellan Oscillation are very, very important indeed. So when you look at the sea surface temperature anomalies for the current period, this is how it's looking. Now, one take home from this is you look for the warmest waters compared to average. So enhanced convection over warmer than average waters tends to be where the focal point is. You've got a slight cooling over the West Indian Ocean. You've also got that cold now extending what initially was to the east, now to the west of the international dateline, which is generally 180 degrees in longitude. Once you start to cool, now this is very important because remember phases 7 and 8 is around the date line. And once you start to cool those waters, you tend to find that the MJO may try to avoid phases 7 and 8 if those waters along the equator are below average. But one thing that is important to note is actually you've got a tremendous amount of warmth to the north of this, which may mean we may still try and fire the convection over phases 7 and 8. Phases 7 and 8 are cold phases. Phases 2 and particularly 3 into 4 into 5, they tend to promote milder phases, more zonal flat jet stream across much of the northern hemisphere, and also it tends to promote a positive Arctic oscillation and North Atlantic oscillation. Positive Arctic oscillation tends to see the cold get bottled up within the Arctic. You tend to strengthen the mean zonal winds underneath, and therefore you tend to flood the continents, whether it be North America or Western Europe, with mild oceanic air. So Arctic air gets generally deflected to the north. So the general thinking would be, based purely on the tropical belt, where this area of convection tends to focus, you've got a concentration of warm waters generally over the maritime continent, which of course, if you look at the diagram here, the maritime continent is generally phases 4 and 5. That tends to focus more of an Arctic oscillation and North Atlantic oscillation positive. Once you go into phases 7, 8, and 1, where the waters are actually below average because we've had stronger easterly trade winds in recent times, you tend to find that we don't see the cold phases of the MJO when you've got that cold waters within the tropics over the Central Pacific. But like I say, that being said, we may see something slightly different this year because of the abnormal warmth to the north of the equator. So into the subtropical belt of the Pacific, you've got actually quite a lot of warmth. So the area of convection that feeds off that warmer water may actually be slightly further north from the equator. So these are the little adjustments that need to be made. We're going to look at the stratosphere versus the tropospheric polar vortex as well. We do have a strengthening of the stratospheric polar vortex, and we may see some of that cold and very strong cold pull over the stratosphere within the upper levels of the stratosphere. Remember, there's different layers within the atmosphere, obviously, and there is a coupling and a decoupling of the polar vortex depending on whether it's within the stratospheric level or whether it's within the tropospheric level. There's two separate polar vortexes. Sometimes they couple with each other, especially when you've got things going on, whether it be a warming taking place within the stratosphere, but sometimes you've got this quite distinct disconnect between stratosphere and even lower stratosphere, and then obviously going further than that, you've got the troposphere underneath. Very complex, and I hope this is making sense. But I want to show you a couple of interesting things here. So I've talked about the Magellan oscillation in the various phases. We are in phases 4 and 5 of the Magellan oscillation at the moment here. The Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation is going to go positive, especially the North Atlantic oscillation. Maybe not so much the Arctic oscillation. There's interesting little things that are going on at the moment that need to be monitored, especially as we move towards the latter half of December. But certainly we're seeing the strengthening of the polar vortex up in the upper levels of the atmosphere. We're going through the warm phases of 4 and 5 at the moment. And the pattern is essentially looking like a strong polar vortex coupled with a warm phases of the MJO. Does that make sense? I hope it does. We're going to start to see ridging building north within the subtropics. So we're going to start to see heights coming up to the south, and they're going to start to lower to the north up towards the Arctic region. So this is the upcoming 5-day period. You can see here this belt of high pressure now moving across eastern North America. So we're removing that Arctic air mass that dumped the tremendous cold into the eastern side of the United States during the course of last week. We're starting to see warmer air moving across the continent. But what has happened is with that cold air, sinking south has reactivated the jet. We've actually started to kick the atmosphere in a different mode over Western Europe because it's been very blocked up. We've had a trough trapped underneath over Iberia, for example, strong high pressure over Scotland. We've seen easterly or northeasterly winds underneath that high, creating all the anticyclonic gloom over England and Wales, for example. But generally speaking, it's not been an overly cold pattern with a northeasterly flow without any major cold to the east over the continent, over Scandinavia. You have nothing to really drag in, so therefore it's been chilly, it's been drab, but temperature's still 6, 7, 8 Celsius with a northeasterly wind. It's just felt, dismal, dreary, gloomy, but not majorly cold for that source of airflow. But look at this here, upcoming 6 to 10 days, and this is why I think this is going to make sense. Now we've got this high pressure shifting westwards, maybe trying to extend north over the Atlantic. That may start to trigger more of a northwesterly airflow. This is the period now out to Christmas Eve, so 19th of December through the 24th of December. We've got low pressure between Canada and Greenland. We've also got low pressure over western areas of Europe. That could signify something rather interesting actually in this period. Then the 11 to 15 day, you can see here that we've got generally high pressure within the middle latitudes. We've got low pressure Greenland up towards the Arctic region. Why would that make sense? Now, first and foremost, we've got the MJO moving through phases 4 and 5. It is going to start to creep towards the colder phases as we move forward. But if we look at this cross-section of the stratospheric polar vortex, there has been in recent times, now we've had a stretched PV, and the reasons for that is likely because we've had quite a lot of blocking within the low to middle levels of the atmosphere here. So some of that blockiness that we've seen, negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, during the past few weeks, that's been then propagating energy up into the stratosphere, creating a bit of a stretch of the PV. And what that's doing is it's forcing a little bit of wave breaking within the stratospheric polar vortex, but it's favoured cold more towards North America as opposed to Western Europe. And what's happening is we're starting to strengthen the polar vortex up towards the upper levels of the atmosphere. So this is 10 millibars all the way up to the top of the stratosphere, right down to the surface here. And you notice here that we've had low heights during August. Then we had a lot of blockiness during the month of September and October. That extending up into the lower portions of the stratosphere. 50 millibars is the lower portions of the stratosphere. 10 millibars is the upper levels of the stratosphere. And then you've got the boundary layer underneath that 50 millibar level. That is the boundary layer between stratosphere and troposphere. Our weather resides within the troposphere. And you've seen a lot of blockiness. That has been creating frictional effects on the polar vortex, stretching it. But we are expecting this increase in cold in the upper levels of the atmosphere up towards the 10 millibar level, and that is expected to start to propagate down towards the 50 millibar level. And usually what happens is at the 50 millibar level, that quite nicely reflects the 500 millibar level, and that's down to 18,000 feet above our heads. I know this is technical, and I know this is probably quite hard to understand, but I'm trying to give you the back and the reasons behind. Scrap models. Models are very difficult to go by at the best of times, but the modelling is making sense with what's going on way up above our heads. You've got this cooling at 10 millibars all the way down to 50 millibars as we progress through the first couple of weeks of December. And if we look at this graphic here, you can see the difference between the stratospheric polar vortex and the tropospheric polar vortex. Two different entities, but if you stretch the upper levels of the polar vortex, you quite often get downstream effects. But that stretching, especially when you've got warming between East Asia and northwestern America, you have a cross-polar flow, so you start to draw cold out of Siberia across the top and into eastern North America when you've got that stretched PV. It doesn't tend to favour Western Europe, unfortunately. It tends to actually favour a stronger jet across the Atlantic and storminess into Western Europe. So you can see here the two different layers. You've got the stratospheric polar vortex in the upper level, and then you've got right down within the troposphere, you've got the tropospheric polar vortex. You could have a very powerful stratospheric polar vortex, but a very weak tropospheric polar vortex that is allowing cold to empty out of the Arctic towards the middle latitudes, whether it be North America, Europe, or Asia. But I want to show you this here. This is really interesting, actually, because this is another interesting factor. Remember, I said to you, we've had quite a lot of blocking during the month of September, back half of September, first half of October. What that's been doing is that's been creating wave energy that's been lifting up into the stratospheric circulation. And what that does is it creates waves. As that energy gets lifted out of the troposphere into the stratosphere, you then create waving. And once those waves start to be generated within the stratospheric circulation, you're actually creating warming. And that's why we see warming within the stratosphere. And when these waves are strong enough and we are creating more and more wave action within the fluid nature of the stratospheric circulation, you can eventually start to see a reversal in the winds. The strong winds circling the polar vortex is the zonal mean zonal wind. And what happens is you start to slow down these mean zonal winds when you're creating these waves as you propagate the energy from troposphere into the stratosphere. What is happening is these strong warming episodes eventually can create a collapse or a displacement of the polar vortex. You can collapse it, you can displace it, you can also split the polar vortex into two. You can see here generally this graphic showing that propagation and to the point where it actually reverses the circulation altogether. Instead of it blowing from west to east, it actually goes from east to west, and therefore you then force the cold that's locked up in the upper levels down into the troposphere, and that's where you get these major Arctic outbreaks after a major sudden stratospheric warming takes place. You can actually warm the stratosphere by as much as 50 Celsius within the space of a couple of days. A pretty extreme event, actually, and it happens every so many years. Are we going to see that anytime soon? Unfortunately, I don't think we are. This is the current look of the polar vortex at the time of recording this Saturday evening, and you can see here that we've got this look quite as strong. You can see the warming taking place, like I say, over eastern Asia, across the North Pacific. That is forcing this little stretching of the PV. You're also following the lines of equal pressure at the 10 millibar level. That is seeing the cold getting transferred over the top and into eastern North America. But what happens is you increase the gradient when you've got the cold pool centered where it's positioned now over the eastern side of the Arctic, towards Greenland, towards Europe. When you've got Arctic air getting driven southwards, it tends to force stronger jet, lower heights between Greenland and Europe, and a very zonal west to east jet stream across the eastern side of the Atlantic. You can see here that as we play through, you've got this warming taking place up at 10 millibars, but I am not overly convinced that this is going to necessarily mean anything. You can see a shrinking of the polar vortex. Notice that. You can see a shrinking taking place, and certainly there's a lot of movement there. So this is the current look, quite donut shaped to an extent, slightly off center. You've got the core of the PV at around minus 90 Celsius. There's that warming taking place, possibly created by blocking, lifting northwards. I don't know, but that's an interesting look. But I want to show you this here, and this is off this is, let me just see here, bear with me a second. So this is off the AER.com website. This is Judah Cohen's site, and this is a nice little cross section of the atmosphere. This is the polar cap heights, and you can see the blocking that took place during the month of November, especially within the lower portions of the within the troposphere, but also the lower portions of the stratosphere as well. But look at how the blues are starting to drop from mid-levels all the way down to the lower levels as we move towards the middle and second half of December. What does this mean? It means that the strong PV that we've got going at the moment is likely to start to influence the lower portions of the atmosphere here from strat into trope. And if you look at this graphic here, in terms of the mean zonal winds, let's have a look at the latest of the ECMWF model. And it's indicating that we have got quite strong mean zonal winds above the average all the way out to the early portions of December. In fact, it remains above average all the way right through, unfortunately, into what appears to be the back half of January. So the ECMWF is not particularly enthusiastic in terms of the polar vortex weakening in any appreciable way anytime soon, unfortunately. Now, I want to show you this here. This is the 10 millibar level. I think there's quite a nice connection between the lower portions of the stratosphere and how the atmosphere looks underneath. Now, this is down at 50 millibars. This is how it's looking so far. So we've got this warming Asia towards the western side of North America across the top here. So you've got that cross-polar connection here. You've also got the strength in the jet stream. But where this cold pool is centered within the lower stratosphere, unfortunately, that is a concern. That suggests to me positive North Atlantic oscillation, strong jet stream, and westerly influence into western areas of Europe. Now, this is the here and now. Let's go all the way out to 10 days from now. So, you're talking, pretty much Christmas or just about Christmas. 50 millibars, how it's looking. We've got the cold pool centered bank slap over the Arctic region. Folks, unfortunately, that looks very much like what the GFS ensemble is looking like for the period between the 24th and the 29th of December. Look at the positive heights to the south, negative heights up towards the Arctic region. That would be generally quite a mild look. The caveat to that, however, is despite the fact that the PV is strengthening, we're going through the warm phases of the MJO, we are expecting to see the MJO try to push more and more towards phases 7. So that's that convection moving into the Central Pacific. And what that may do is it may actually offset what's going on within the stratosphere. You can still get a favorable MJO. You can still get a cold period despite the fact that the polar vortex is rather strong. Remember this disconnect between troposphere, lower stratosphere, and the upper levels of the stratosphere. There is a disconnect going on. But certainly, I think during the second half of December, there is quite a good chance that this pattern becomes unfavorable in terms of a broad scale negative Arctic oscillation, negative North Atlantic oscillation, appreciable Arctic that sticks around over Eastern North America, Western Europe, Eastern Asia. Unfortunately, I don't see it based on what I'm seeing at the moment. But we'll wait and see what happens. You can see that the lower stratosphere is seeing that cold gather across the Arctic, and therefore you would expect to see more westerly flow. If we look at the GFS model real quick, you can see now that we've reshaped the atmosphere thanks to that stronger jet moving across the Atlantic, courtesy of the Arctic outbreak into Eastern North America. That's then forced the high to collapse over the UK, shift south, opens the door to westerly winds. And if we play through this loop here, what's going to happen is we're going to see surges of warm lift north, cold come south, depending on areas of low pressure moving east or west to east across the Atlantic. Therefore, there is an opportunity for either a very mild Christmas and then a cold Boxing Day into the following day, or you can have cold followed by warm, etc., etc. The point is that the atmosphere is very westerly as we progress through the next week to 10 days, even fortnight. You can see here as I play through this loop, this fluid west to east component to the atmosphere. But there is areas of low pressure that is going to allow mild coming north and cold coming south. The take home is this, that the Atlantic looks to be in control in the run-up and probably through Christmas towards the New Year period. But that does not mean it's going to be guaranteed mild. It just depends on the position of low pressure. If the area of low pressure around Christmas Day, say the back end of Christmas Eve into Christmas Day, if low pressure is to the west of the UK, you're going to have milder conditions. But that area of low pressure may move through during Christmas Day into Boxing Day, and then you've got cold northwesterly winds, and you've got snow, especially across northern areas of the UK. So we'll play through this here. Let's look at the 850 temperatures off the GFS model. Again, take models, even now, with a pinch of salt. There's no point in showing them on social media. If you are, it's essentially for clickbait. It's maybe for hype. There is no guarantee about anything. Look at this here. Very mild conditions at the moment. Sunday, 0900 UTC. Then as we play through the loop, we've got more surges of mild coming northwards here. We could see some fairly milder, actually, early next week as these areas of low pressure dig a little bit south to the west of the UK and Ireland. Allows milder conditions to then lift north. But watch what happens. As that area of low pressure moves through, we're in the colder air. So again, each individual model run is going to shift the timing of the warm and cold. Continue to play through. We're back into the milder air. Then we're back into the colder air. We're back into the milder air. And you kind of generally get my point. So this is a phase 4 into 5 of the MJO. This looks quite like a strong polar vortex episode, but we've got slightly colder air getting pushed further south. But the problem is that the cold over the stratosphere is looking likely to start to progress southwards, or down, not south, but actually down into the lower portions of the stratosphere. And that might actually start to tighten up the low heights over the Arctic and then lift the milder air north as well. But certainly it's all to play for when it comes to the run-up to Christmas. Atlantic looks to be in control, but it's all about the timing of these areas of low pressure moving in off the Atlantic, depending on whether it's going to be very mild or whether it's going to be quite chilly. Generally speaking, this is a mild overall setup, I'm afraid, folks. I think we're leaning more towards mild. Looks as if December is very much going to be warmer than average, and that has been what both the December outlook and the Christmas winter forecast. Sorry, my mind's starting to... It's been a busy, long day. So let me know in the comment section below. Did you enjoy this? Was it too technical? Did you understand it? Do you want more of these kind of in-depth explanations? Is there something else that you would like discussed? You can let me know in the comment section below. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And I'll see you tomorrow with the global weather and climate report. Bye for now.